The text message arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports at my desk. Don't come to Thanksgiving this year. Jessica's handling everything now. We think it's better this way. I stared at the screen for a full minute, my coffee growing cold as the words sank in. 3 weeks earlier, I'd written a $47,000 check to save my parents from foreclosure, emptying my emergency fund and cashing out half my retirement account to keep them in their house. Now my sister, who hadn't contributed a single dollar to the rescue, was suddenly in charge of family gatherings, and I was uninvited to the holiday I'd been hosting for the past 8 years. My name is Adrienne, and I work as a senior financial analyst for a mid-sized investment firm downtown. The glass office on the 32nd floor overlooks the river, and I spend most days surrounded by spreadsheets and market reports, helping clients navigate complex financial decisions. It's methodical work that suits my personality. I like problems with clear solutions, numbers that add up correctly, and plans that unfold exactly as projected. At home, I live in a restored Victorian house that I've been renovating room by room for the past 6 years. The kitchen was my first major project, with subway tile backsplash and butcher block counters that I installed myself during weekends and evenings. Every November, I'd transform that kitchen into Thanksgiving headquarters, spending days preparing dishes for 23 family members who'd crowd around my dining room table and spill into the living room with plates balanced on their knees. The house had become the unofficial family gathering place after I bought it, partly because I had the space and partly because I enjoyed hosting. My parents would arrive early to help with prep work, my father carving turkey while my mother arranged flowers from her garden. My sister Jessica would show up fashionably late with store-bought dessert and her 2 kids in tow, always apologizing for not being able to help more because of her busy schedule as a real estate agent. For 8 years, this had been our tradition. I'd handle the planning, shopping, cooking, and cleanup while everyone else enjoyed the meal and each other's company. It was expensive and exhausting, but I loved seeing 3 generations gathered in my home, loved being the one who made it all possible. The irony of being excluded from my own tradition wasn't lost on me. If family drama like this hits close to home, make sure you're subscribed. These stories matter. The financial crisis had been building for months before my parents finally told me how bad things really were. My father had lost his job at the manufacturing plant where he'd worked for 28 years, and my mother's part-time work at the library wasn't enough to cover their mortgage payments. They'd been living on credit cards and borrowing against their home equity, thinking Dad would find new work quickly. But at 62, he discovered that decades of experience meant nothing in a job market that valued cheaper, younger workers. Month after month of interviews led nowhere, and the bills kept accumulating. By the time they swallowed their pride and asked for help, they were 3 months behind on their mortgage and facing foreclosure proceedings. I didn't hesitate. These were my parents, the people who'd worked 2 jobs each to pay for my college education, who'd supported my career choices even when they didn't understand them. The $47,000 wasn't just about saving their house, it was about preserving their dignity and security in what should have been their golden years. Jessica's response when I told her about the bailout was telling. She said it was generous of me, but she simply couldn't contribute anything substantial because of her own financial commitments. She had a new SUV payment, private school tuition for her kids, and a recent kitchen renovation that had gone over budget. Her tone suggested that my ability to help was somehow unfair, like I had advantages she lacked rather than simply different priorities. What stung most was my parents' reaction. Instead of the grateful relief I'd expected, there was an uncomfortable awkwardness, as if my intervention had somehow diminished them. They thanked me, of course, but there was distance in it, a formality that hadn't existed before. I tried to brush off the feeling, telling myself they were just processing the stress of nearly losing their home. But over the following weeks, I noticed subtle changes. Phone calls became less frequent. When I stopped by their house, conversations felt stilted, artificial. It was as if saving them had somehow made me the outsider, the one who'd upset the natural balance of family dynamics. The Thanksgiving text arrived exactly 3 weeks after I'd transferred the money to their mortgage company. I was in the middle of a client presentation when my phone buzzed, but something about the message timing made me check it immediately. The words felt like a physical blow, each one carefully chosen to maximize hurt while maintaining plausible deniability. Don't come to Thanksgiving this year. Jessica's handling everything now. We think it's better this way. No explanation, no acknowledgement of the 8 years I'd hosted, no recognition that this was my tradition they were dissolving with a text message. Just a cold dismissal delivered with the emotional weight of a weather update. I excused myself from the meeting and walked to the bathroom, where I read the message 3 more times, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. I called my mother immediately, but the conversation only made things worse. She spoke in the same careful, distant tone I'd been hearing for weeks, explaining that Jessica had volunteered to take over hosting duties, and they thought it would be nice to give me a break from all the work. When I pointed out that I'd never complained about the work, never asked for a break, she got defensive. Jessica just thinks the family needs some new energy, she said. You know how you can be about wanting everything done a certain way. The accusation hit like ice water. Suddenly, I was controlling, demanding, inflexible, all because I'd cared enough to make Thanksgiving special for everyone. The same attention to detail that had produced 8 years of memorable holidays was now being reframed as a character flaw that needed to be managed around. I hung up feeling dizzy with disbelief. In 3 weeks, I'd gone from family savior to family problem. The daughter who'd emptied her savings to prevent their foreclosure was now too difficult to include in holiday plans. The sister who'd never contributed financially was suddenly the better choice to lead family gatherings. That evening, I walked through my house seeing it differently. The dining room table I'd refinished specifically to seat our large family. The china cabinet filled with dishes I'd collected for special occasions. The guest bedrooms I'd furnished for visiting relatives. Everything was designed around being the family gathering place, around being needed and wanted and central to our traditions. Now I was just the one who'd written the check and outlived her usefulness. I spent that night lying awake, replaying every family interaction from the past 3 weeks, looking for clues I'd missed. The conversations that ended too quickly when I entered the room. The way Jessica had started speaking for my parents during family phone calls. The subtle shift from gratitude to something that felt uncomfortably like resentment. By morning, I understood what had happened. My financial rescue hadn't just saved their house, it had exposed the family power dynamic in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. For years, I'd been useful but not threatening, the successful daughter who hosted holidays and could be counted on for practical help. But writing that check had revealed something different. I had real power, real resources, the ability to solve problems that left everyone else helpless. That level of capability was apparently more intimidating than inspiring. Instead of increasing my standing in the family, it had made me dangerous, someone whose influence needed to be contained. Jessica's sudden ascension to family coordinator wasn't random. It was a calculated move to restore balance, to put someone more manageable in charge of family dynamics. The realization was devastating and clarifying at the same time. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to be the dependable one, the problem solver, the person who could be counted on when things got difficult. But dependability, I learned, was only valued as long as it didn't come with independence. The moment my capability exceeded my family's comfort level, I became a liability instead of an asset. I got up that morning and made coffee in my beautiful kitchen, looking around at the home I'd created to welcome the people who'd just excluded me. For the first time in weeks, I felt perfectly clear about what needed to happen next. They wanted Jessica in charge of family traditions? Fine. But they were about to learn the difference between hosting Thanksgiving and funding it. My first move was simple research. I spent the weekend calculating exactly how much I'd spent on Thanksgiving over the past 8 years. Not just food and drinks, but decorations, table linens, flowers, special serving pieces, even the gas and electric bills for cooking massive meals. The number was staggering, $23,400 across 8 years, an average of nearly $3,000 per holiday. Then I started making phone calls to family members, ostensibly to let them know about the hosting change, but really to gauge reactions. My Aunt Carol was confused, asking why I wasn't hosting anymore when everyone loved coming to my house. My cousin Mike seemed genuinely disappointed, mentioning how much his kids looked forward to playing in my backyard after dinner. But the most revealing conversation was with my Uncle Frank, my father's brother, who'd always been direct to the point of rudeness. He asked flat out if this was about money, if my parents were uncomfortable after I'd bailed them out financially. When I confirmed his suspicion, he was quiet for a long moment before saying he'd wondered if something like this might happen. That conversation gave me the opening I needed. I started sharing the true story with extended family members, not in a gossipy way, but as honest explanation for why traditions were changing. I explained about the mortgage rescue, about my parents' apparent discomfort with being helped, and about being excluded from the holiday I'd hosted for nearly a decade. The response was immediate and stronger than I'd expected. Several relatives called my parents directly, asking pointed questions about the hosting change and expressing disappointment about not gathering at my house anymore. My Aunt Carol was particularly blunt, asking my mother why she was letting Jessica take over when everyone knew I was the better host. But my parents doubled down, insisting that the change was about giving me a break and letting Jessica have a turn. They painted it as fairness, as spreading responsibility around the family rather than acknowledging the real reason for my exclusion. It was time for a more direct approach. Jessica's first major mistake was asking me to contribute money for the ingredients while being excluded from the planning and cooking. The text message arrived 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, a cheerful request asking if I could Venmo her $400 to help cover food costs, since she was taking on such a big responsibility for the first time. I screenshot the message and sent it to my group chat with extended family members, along with a simple question: why am I being asked to fund a dinner I'm not invited to attend? The reaction was swift and brutal. Within hours, my phone was ringing with calls from relatives who were suddenly understanding the full scope of what was happening. It wasn't just about hosting duties or family rotation. I was being expected to financially support my own exclusion. My Uncle Frank called Jessica directly and told her exactly what he thought of her request. Aunt Carol confronted my parents about the mixed messages they were sending. Cousin Mike flat out said he wasn't comfortable attending a dinner that excluded me while expecting my financial contribution. By evening, I had 13 family members saying they wouldn't be attending Jessica's dinner unless the invitation situation was resolved. My parents found themselves facing the prospect of a Thanksgiving dinner with just Jessica's immediate family after decades of large gatherings. The phone call from my mother came at 9 p.m. Her voice was strained, defensive, but underneath I could hear genuine panic. She asked if we could work something out, if there was a way for everyone to be included without hurt feelings. I kept my response simple and clear. I would be happy to host Thanksgiving as I had for the past 8 years, planning and paying for everything as always. Or Jessica could host and handle all responsibilities, including financial ones, for the dinner she'd claimed to want to organize. But I would not fund my own exclusion from family gatherings, and I would not pretend that being uninvited was actually a favor to me. The choice was theirs, but the days of taking my contribution for granted while marginalizing my presence were over. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and cold, with frost covering my backyard garden that usually provided centerpiece flowers for the dining room table. I woke up alone in my house for the first time in 9 years on the holiday, and instead of the frantic energy of final meal preparations, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. Jessica had ultimately decided she couldn't handle the financial responsibility of hosting 23 people, but my parents were too proud to ask me directly to resume my role. Instead, they'd quietly contacted family members to say that Thanksgiving was canceled this year due to scheduling conflicts. But canceling the holiday wasn't the same as canceling the consequences. Over the following weeks, I heard from multiple relatives about their disappointment in how the situation had been handled. Several mentioned that they were reconsidering their own relationships with my parents, questioning what other family dynamics they might have misunderstood. My relationship with Jessica shifted permanently. Where there had once been sisterly competition and occasional tension, now there was clear understanding of our different values and priorities. She learned that organizing family events involved more than just claiming credit for other people's work, and I learned that generosity without boundaries was often mistaken for obligation. My parents and I eventually found a new equilibrium, but it took months and required honest conversations about money, power, and family expectations. They slowly began to understand that excluding me after I'd saved their home hadn't been about giving me a break. It had been about managing their own discomfort with owing me something they couldn't repay. The house felt different now, more mine, and less like a family shrine. I kept the dining room table and good china, but I also started making plans for what I wanted the space to become rather than what others expected it to provide. Some traditions, I realized, were worth preserving. Others needed to be rebuilt from scratch. The following year, I hosted a small Thanksgiving dinner for 6 carefully chosen family members, the ones who'd supported me during the exclusion crisis and genuinely appreciated the effort involved in bringing people together. The meal was elegant, intimate, and free of the complicated dynamics that had poisoned previous gatherings. My parents attended, along with Uncle Frank and Aunt Carol. Jessica was invited but declined, choosing instead to host her own smaller gathering. The separation wasn't hostile, just honest, an acknowledgement that some family relationships work better with clear boundaries and realistic expectations. I've learned that financial generosity doesn't automatically translate to emotional appreciation, and that solving other people's problems can sometimes create resentment instead of gratitude. The $47,000 I spent saving their house was still the right choice, but it taught me valuable lessons about the difference between helping and enabling, between being generous and being taken for granted. The real victory wasn't getting my hosting role back, it was establishing that my contributions, financial and otherwise, came with expectations of basic respect and inclusion. Family relationships, like any other investment, require honest assessment of costs and returns. Sometimes the best thing you can do for family dynamics is refuse to subsidize your own mistreatment.